Welcome, everyone, to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name is Michael Faree. We got a great show for you today. We've got Ruben Ugarte from ActiveProspect with us. We're going to talk all things solar. A couple of the different things that we'll be talking about is both from the sell side and the buy side. Ruben spent a lot of time as a lead buyer, so we get to hear a little bit about his experiences and how he sees it now. But also, we get to hear about his opinions on the industry as a whole. So maybe you've been thinking about entering the solar lead generation field and generating leads in that vertical. We talk a little bit about that and what the opportunity looks like today. But we're going to dive into everything solar today. Before we get started, though, I do want to let you know that we've opened up the exhibit hall and sponsorship opportunities to the public now. We allowed our exhibitors and sponsors to have first dibs at it for 2021, but that time frame has passed, and so now we're opening it up to you all. So if you're interested in being a part of the Lead Generation World Conference, as you know, we keep our exhibit hall the center of the show, so it's a great opportunity to be a part of the community and get your brand out there. We also have Lead Generation World London in October, and if you're interested in attending that show, we've got a great set of content, really a lot of opportunities in Europe and the UK for companies across the world to be a part of. So Lead Generation World London is certainly an opportunity, something you should think about attending. We'll have registration should be opening up March 25th. We do have limited booths and stands available for exhibitors, and then of course we have sponsorship opportunities for that show too. So definitely something to consider there. If you're interested, just reach out to us on our website. So anyways, without further ado, let's bring in Ruben and start talking a little solar shop. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Generation World Podcast. I've got Ruben Ugarte here. Did I say it right? I feel like I didn't say it right.
You know what? You said it fine. It's always been kind of choppy for my entire life.
But I want to say Ugarte. But I know we got to get the Ugarte on it, right?
You can go with yogurt. I've heard yogurt before, so yeah, go for it.
Well, thanks for joining the show. You're with ActiveProspect, a long-time industry company. Doing a lot of good things for this space, and we'll dive into that whole thing. But wanted to bring you on because you have a pretty unique experience of being a lead buyer at one point in time. In the solar energy space, solar panel industry, and then sort of have jumped over to the tech side and lead gen, and we'll dive into all that sort of stuff. But real quick, tell me a little bit about how you got initially into the solar industry.
Yeah, so after the crash, like many, trying to figure out like, hey, what am I going to do with my life?
Is that
after the mortgage crash? Financial crash. Was in finance before, and really wanted to be in a space that I felt the product was positive, both for the client, myself, the environment, and just in general, right? I mean, just it always was compelling to think that you could harness the energy from the sun. And at the time, 2008, 2009. A lot of the finance tools that are available today weren't there, but you could see that the industry was progressive. So I started working at a company, volunteering at a company called Grid Alternatives, which is out here in California, a few other states. And essentially you can sign up, you can go to a training for about an hour, and then they allow you to jump up on a roof and install solar systems for low-income housing. Yeah. So it was pretty rad. Cool. It was real hands-on experience. And basically they install free solar for low-income housing in some pretty, afflicted areas, Compton, South Central, and things like that. So really kind of fell in love with just the fact of going on a roof, installing. My family does own a roofing company in Los Angeles, so I have some construction roots and, know about, roofing and things of that nature. And after being on the roof and being, installing, I took a class at Pasadena City College, a solar class, which was pretty, talked about azimuth and the science behind it more. So here I am selling roofs for my uncle. going to Grid Alternatives to install solar, and then going to a community college to learn about solar. So I was really enthralled with it. Um, Ended up doing a few job interviews with a company called Solar City and Varango at the time, and then a company called Real Good Solar, and ended up taking a position as a sales rep for Real Good Solar, which ended up becoming RGS Energy, which I would just have like a moment of silence for that team because actually they recently went under. But yeah, I started selling residential solar throughout Southern California, both residential, small commercial. At the time, most of it was all cash and maybe a few power purchase agreements at the time, but fell in love with it. And the people who I would meet who were buying solar, it ranged from people in the Hollywood Hills who were installing fat systems, $100,000 plus, all the way to people in San Diego who maybe installing a smaller system or whatnot. But really fell in love with it, and that's kind of how things started.
Yeah. So you were doing the installation at first, and then sales, and then into business development. Is that right?
Yeah, so at the time at Real Good Solar, our branch manager at the time, a real good friend of mine, Brian Walrod, ended up moving on and took a position as president of a company called Horizon Solar Power, which was based out in the desert, the Hemet, Riverside region. And a few months after he, took that position, I came on board and started to do business development, which entailed everything from setting up some phones and trying to get some leads to just essentially generating leads in all types of capacities.
Now, did you do that for Sungevity as well, or was that a little bit different role when it comes to like all hands on to doing, setting up phones, leads and marketing and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so at the time when Horizon had actually merged with Sungevity,
Oh, gotcha.
at that point the company was mature. It had already gone through a transaction with the VC, and we had already built the paid lead channel to the point where it was generating anywhere from 150 sales to 200 on a monthly basis. And when we merged with Sungevity, that was a challenge. But we were able to feed the Sungevity team through the Horizon paid lead channel and ultimately deliver leads to multiple call centers and drive sales for both teams and ultimately for the entire team as a whole.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what it was like as a lead buyer in 2014. One of the reason why is I think that's around the same time. Maybe it was 2013 I was, or 12, but I was doing lead gen for solar as well. I started a company and did nothing but paid search advertising to generate solar leads, and the quality was really really good, but it was a little bit before everybody started to get in, and there
Yep.
were a ton of other marketers in the space, so we sort of had it all to ourselves. Really, the timing was really good so we had a couple good years
Yeah.
of marketing there until all of a sudden all these other companies came in and drove up the bids and all this sort of stuff, and we had to lower our costs, and it just the whole thing became
Yeah.
more competitive. But
Yep.
what was it like as a buyer trying to find good leads, and that whole challenge? Was it easy to it back then, or was it difficult?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, looking back in hindsight, it was fun. It was challenging. I mean, coming from a sales background of selling solar systems to now being on the marketing side was all new to me.
Yeah.
But it kind of just started with let's buy a few leads. At the time, the big firm, and still is, a company called Clean Energy Experts, which is owned by Sunrun. At the time, they had a pretty advanced uh, platform where you can purchase leads and kind of toggle on regions and zips. And it kind of all started with buying a few leads from them, and
Yeah.
a few leads would come in, and they sold a few. All right, well, let's go check out a few more. Let's buy a few more, and then it started to go from a couple $1,000s to 5,000 to 10,000, 20,000. Then all of a sudden, I'm reaching out to other lead vendors and saying, "Hey, I'm maxed out with this vendor. Could you send me?" And it was just a real trial and error. And I think the process of going through failure and having companies allow you to fail on the marketing side and figure out like what works, what doesn't, that was huge. Without that failure, I don't think we would have gotten to the point of of scale. And when I say scale, um, in California, or at least Southern California at the time, deals ranged for solar were anywhere between 28 to $35,000 gross system price. Um, and when you're able to get to that 100 unit threshold, I mean, that's, you're making some good money there. And then when you're able to get to that 150 level, at the time that was unheard of outside of some of the big firms like Solar City,
Yeah.
Sunrun.
Yeah. So, was it easy to scale? I mean, what was sort of like, I'm just sort of thinking back. I mean, I could imagine, first getting into sort of buying leads slowly with one company. I'm sure there was a point where you thought there would be replicatable across other partners, and then probably realized that there actually aren't some, partners that aren't very good, and some are better than others, and, had those challenges and trials and errors as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there was a lot of trial and error, just coming up with reporting on how to figure out who's doing what, cost of opportunities, cost of sales, cost per appointments. These are all things that we developed and learned as we grew.
Hmm.
Certainly, quality varied. Uh, Trying to determine how quality varies and trying to figure out why one lead vendor is better than another, was a challenge. But I think the big turning point for our success was going from sending leads to a call or an inside sales team of 3 or 4 or 5 people to then opening it up to the entire call center, which at the time, we must have had somewhere between 50 to 70 agents who were dialing on leads, outbounding. Um, and obviously, with TCPA and the rise of TCPA and issues that come from that, the model switched from being an outbound model calling on data lists to being an inbound model where the majority was coming in from either paid leads or canvassing field marketing. And then a third would come from other sources like digital, retail, direct mailers, lawn signs, trucks, things like that.
Yeah. Now, so you just mentioned that you first had a small outbound team, and then you opened it up to
Yeah.
the full sales team. What was the sort of thought process, and why did you guys make that step?
Yeah, so having the inbound team, you kind of had the best of the best calling on these inbound leads. Um, the capacity, we weren't able to get past the 40 to 60 unit sale mark calling with 4 to 5 people, and so we really needed a breakthrough. So what we decided to do was essentially open it up to the entire call center, where the lead would come in, and instead of just going to 4 or 5 people, now it's being round robin to 50 or 60 people. And we began to learn how to automate our call cadence and to use the call cadence effectively. Obviously, how to monitor speed to lead, which is critical. I know in your past podcasts, you guys have talked about that. And I think everybody knows in lead gen, the faster you call the lead, the higher the
Yep.
conversion rate is going to be. But I think just kind of learning and figuring out, like, wow, if we open this up and if we call it X amount of times, and we have a cadence of an email going here or an SMS, that the conversion rate can tick up here, tick up here, tick up there. And then that compiled with trying to figure out how to buy better and figure out which vendors to work with at which price points uh, over time. You're lowering your front end media cost, improving your conversion rate at the end of the funnel. And then if you have a good sales team that rocks, and obviously a great operations team that can install the systems, you're in position.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that I think, and I'm sure maybe exacerbated to some extent in in solar, because you're limited to geographic territories to some extent, right? I mean, I remember
Yeah.
solar was very much about zip code filtering, and then of course state regulations and different programs in each state would lead to more or less opportunity depending on what state it was.
Yep.
And I think back then it was like really there's only maybe 7 states, boiled
Correct.
down to maybe 5, that you could really do any business in. And of course, California was one of the better ones because of, the amount that you could sell. The product, I think, too, was higher value than
Yeah.
somewhere in like New Jersey or whatever.
Yep.
Um, but that provides this ceiling of being able to scale to some extent and find more and more prospects. So I have to imagine you got to a point where it was really, really hard finding just new inquiries in general. Or
Yes
was it
and
not? No?
no. I mean, at the time, I mean, 2014, 2015. I mean, those
Yeah.
were some peak years where the amount of installers or the amount of sophistication wasn't where it's at today, where you have hundreds, thousands of installers going after the same
Yeah.
group of people. I would also say, especially in California, there in the major states like Arizona and New Jersey, there's solar fatigue, right? Everybody at the time, solar was still fairly new. I mean, you had heard it, through Obama's presidency. I mean, people knew what solar was, and a lot of people maybe correlated it to solar thermal from the '80s, which kind of went belly up. But it wasn't hard finding lead vendors. I'll be honest. It wasn't
Oh, yeah.
hard finding volume. We were growing. I mean, Southern California is a fairly large region. Millions of homeowners out here, and the company was able to. We were able to acquire from many different sources. We did have to scale, so going from one or two or five lead vendors all the way to like 30 or 40 over the
Crazy.
course of 2 years, and then trying to figure out how to manage those vendors and how to manage returns and manage disposition data was all fun, but very challenging at the same
Yeah.
time.
Did you guys end up using a lead management system of some type?
We did. I mean, that's kind of what led me to where I'm at today. I mean, we're working
Yeah.
for Active Prospect. At the time, um, I knew I needed some type of tool. And I always tell clients this. One of my main reasons for using Active Prospect was to circumvent my IT team, who at the time, and like some IT teams,
Sure.
they're worried about phones, they're worried about computers, they're worried about the Wi-Fi, right? Which are all important things. But from a marketing perspective, I'm looking to onboard vendors fast, effectively, test them, and then scale. And that was not a priority. So I was looking for a system that would help me circumvent that process, allow me to create my own posting strings. I'm not a developer by any means. I
Yeah.
barely, see the new iPhone. I'm like, wow, how do I use this? So figuring out how to create posting strings and docs and get them into my CRM was a challenge. But that's kind of where and how I came across Active Prospect and trying to search for that, along with obviously TCPA compliance.
Yeah. So, Active Prospect actually has a couple different services
Okay.
that I think are beneficial to the industry. I mean, you've got what you just talked about, and you guys call it what that platform is called what?
Lead conduit.
Lead Conduit. That's right.
Yep.
And then you guys also have the Trusted Form, which tell us a little bit about Trusted Form, and then we can jump back into Lead Conduit. But
Yeah, so Trusted Form is a lead certification service. We independently verify the origin, the content, the appearance of internet leads, including the source, the URL, the real-time screenshot of the web, and what the customer's seen. And ultimately, it helps negate and mitigate TCPA litigation when you're purchasing leads from third parties, whether you're generating leads on your own website. It helps you deter legal costs and lawsuits and ultimately class actions that are prevalent in all verticals, but definitely in solar.
and I presume even more so too, it just provides a level of transparency between a buyer and seller, which isn't always there, right? I mean, one of the challenges I'm sure you probably came across having 30 vendors on board is that you didn't always know where the website or where the leads were coming from. Certainly, they tell you one thing, but Trusted Forms probably a way to confirm that origin as well.
Yeah, and I'll even take it back like a further part, like obviously not being in the lead generation space or being a VP of marketing or coming from that type of background. Um, I didn't even know that I was supposed to know that I should know where these leads are coming from, right? Like in hindsight, obviously that obviously makes sense. And now working for Active Prospect and being in this technology firm, but back then I was just trying to find good leads, and good leads were not necessarily I was never necessarily thinking about domains or URLs or what the content is on the landing page. I was thinking about, can I get a lot of appointments off these leads?
Yeah.
And can I get a lot of sales? And so that was a learning process that over time I learned. I mean, And I'll be honest, I didn't even know what TCPA was when I started in purchasing leads. I had to learn, through trial and error, what that acronym stands for. And thankfully, the company allowed me some flexibility. Thankfully, we were in a state where we were growing the company and looking to sell. So ultimately, our leadership team, though we were concerned with CAC, scalability and volume was the main focal point. Um, so it was a discovery process, and I
Yeah.
think that's the same that goes for a lot of lead buyers in home services, and in many verticals where you're just trying to figure out how to win, and what does that mean? You
Yep.
kind of evolves over time.
Yeah. So, so there's trusted form, and then lead conduit, which you sort of alluded to already, was sort a hub for
Yeah.
onboarding different partners.
Yeah, so Lead Conduit is a real-time data acquisition hub. It allows you to filter, you can enhance, you can deliver leads to any system. You can build complex lead flows. You can use data enhancements. You can build real-time rule-based logic in there, and ultimately create a filtration system that serves as a protective layer in front of your CRM, so that ultimately you are rejecting a lot of the bad data, bad phone numbers, duplicates, and ultimately filtering through the quality lead data that ultimately makes it to your CRM, which historically, and still today, companies, don't know that they should be using our technology, and ultimately just post all the data into their CRM and then try to like figure out what's good or bad. And ultimately, you're wasting a lot of indirect cost, call center costs, labor hours, and trying to filter through. So we serve as that mechanism, and ultimately help buyers as well as sellers get a larger ROI at a lower media spend.
Yeah. So you actually talked. I don't know if this sort of segues a little bit, but with Lead Conduit, but at Lead Generation World in January, you had a panel around consumer data augmentation, and obviously, Lead Conduit allows you to partner up with different sources to probably do that as well. But
Yep.
um, beyond that, what are companies in solar? What did you guys talk about? More generally at that in that session with regards to consumer data augmentation in the solar industry? Like, how are people using it? What are they doing?
Yeah, I just love that word augmentation. It sounds so cool, right? Like you're doing
So
such cool things
official.
with
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it was a great panel. We had Home Advisor, who's a client of ours. We had Quinn Street, which is also a client, and the affiliate buyer for Vivint
Yep.
Smart Home. And the essence of the panel was really the cross section of lead gen between large lead vendors like a Quinn Street, like a Home Advisor, and large buyers like a Vivint. And what are the processes and the synergies that you can get at that when working with companies, both lead vendors and buyers, and how do you process leads? Like obviously we know someone's on a web form, they're filling it out, they're like, hey, I'm looking for a solar, I'm looking for a smart home or roofing. What happens between the time that that submission happens, the lead vendor has it, what are they doing in that process, and then what are they delivering, how are they delivering it to, and then ultimately as a buyer, what does a large company or a large brand like a Vivint Home do internally to filter, to enhance, and then ultimately how do you communicate back with each other to make sure that as you scale your media spend that you're doing it efficiently, effectively, in the right geos. And so the conversation was very fluid between the panelists, and ultimately the goal was to just highlight that um, buyers and sellers need to work together and cohesively to ultimately get to the point where you're scaling and you're lowering CAC. I personally think, and I even had that mentality when I first started buying, that like lead buyers and vendors are over here, I'm over here. There's like this big wall between us, and like, they're only looking out for themselves, and I got to look out for me. And so that mentality is just not, effective in today's model of, you got to be
Yeah.
a partner and you have to share data and communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does go a long way. I know one of the biggest fears of a lead buyer is that, oh, well, if I show you how well or I'm doing, then you're going to raise prices on me. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, it is a partnership, and if there is room for growth between two, I suppose that's not the worst case scenario, especially if you're doing well. But I don't think that ever happens. I've never once, seen too many lead sellers go, "Oh man, you're crushing. We're gonna just raise these prices on you." I mean, that
Yeah,
in
I
turn
think a lot
isn't
of
a
people feel
great
that way.
partnership. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think a lot of buyers feel that way. Hey, I don't want to share disposition data to your point, but um, I would just challenge people who think that way to think maybe you should be paid more per lead. Maybe you should pay 20, 25% more if your quality is going to improve by 2x or whatnot, because ultimately your media spend is just your first part of the cost, right? I mean, that's just your direct cost. I mean, a lot of the cost, which a lot of companies don't track as part of their CAC, is that indirect cost of your labor hours, your call center, your dialer, technology costs. All that stuff should be bundled into it, and ultimately it should be a baked in, blended a number. But people don't necessarily determine that, and that's a big reason why you need to work with your partners and you need to share disposition data, because if you can increase your costs on your cost per lead, and I know the mentality for a lot of buyers, and certainly was for me, was I want more leads at a lower cost. Like that's always kind of like the mentality. Like
yeah,
I'm crushing it if I can get a lot of leads at a lower cost, and that's just not true. I mean, you can get to the same end results, the same amount of sales, the same amount of installs, with a higher cost per lead, and lower volume, and ultimately have a lower overall media spend. And if you're able to do that, then you're doing right by your channel and your company, and ultimately doing it more effectively and more efficiently.
yeah. Well, I think the benefit too far outweighs that risk of some increased cost, right? It's like, well, if I'm sharing you data, my partner is going to know which leads, what sources, what ads, whatever is working better, and which ones aren't. If I'm getting, only your lead returns, okay, I know which ones maybe are bad, and we can optimize that. But the good ones are important to know about, just as much as the bad ones. And so,
Absolutely.
benefits probably outweigh the risk of that, price increase. But
Oh,
um,
that's huge. I mean, one
yeah,
of the big things that we did at Horizon with Active Prospect was develop a feature that we have today called the feedback loop, or the feedback feature, which ultimately allows you to not just ping leads in from your vendors into your CRM, but you can then, based on daily or weekly dispositions, you can then trigger back the lead through lead conduit back to the place of entry to your lead vendor, or whoever, and ultimately give your lead vendors automated disposition data, so they can take that information, go, wow, looks like Ruben and his solar company are doing really well in these zips. I'm going to go buy more media here. Or wow, it looks like this creative is working far better than these other creatives. We're going to run that ad more often. These are all things that the vendor can only do if you're communicating with them, and you're ultimately creating a partnership and a highway of data and information that's transparent.
yeah, and that's why I love Active Prospect. I mean, both of the products that you guys provide really do make things, easier and more effective and more efficient for the whole industry. To be, so love it. Tell me a little bit about what just along staying on this topic of data augmentation and Vivint, and what companies are doing with their partners. Maybe going a little bit further than that, what are solar companies doing that you're seeing that's successful? I mean, maybe you're like, now that you're on the other side of the table, you're able to see other companies and what they're doing, and sort of go, oh man, if I kind of knew, so maybe some of that, or are there things that you're seeing that companies are doing really well that maybe you didn't know when you were on the other side of the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that we learned over time, obviously being at a company that went from, 20 or 30 sales a month all the way to 600 plus in a month over the course of 2 years, which was really quick. You learn a lot. And I think a lot of solar companies and a lot of people in the solar industry who have been on, in the solar industry, they call it the solar coaster, is what I've
Yeah.
always been the term, the solar coaster, because you never know, right? So I would say the biggest thing that I'm seeing, that companies who are just crushing it, that are doing really well, is, and I know this is going to be super simple, but they have really good reporting. Reporting is something that I feel in the home service side is lacking. And when I say reporting, I mean not just reporting on the number of leads or dollars or end outputs, but a lot of the KPIs that are specific to appointment rate by campaign, cancel rate by campaign, and being able to have it automated where every day it's hitting you in the face and you're able to see by vendor who's doing good, who's doing bad, what did they do yesterday, how does that performance from yesterday's leads compare to the whole month, month over month, year over year, quarter over quarter, and having the KPIs to allow you to make real-time adjustments in the month rather than what most companies do is they buy a lot of leads. They go through them, and at the end of the month, they look at their performance and go, wow, this worked and this didn't. I'm going to cut this vendor off, or I'm going to increase leads here. Or the one big thing is where in month you didn't get the performance that you wanted and you're like, oh, my CAC's really high, I'm going to turn this vendor off. And then 2 months later you go back to your report and you're like, oh shit, like
they're really
this,
good. Yeah.
wow, I got to turn them back on. You call them back up and they're like, dude, what are you talking? I told you. So it's just this learning lesson that you go through that I think a lot of buyers today, which a lot of the buyers that I meet, obviously I'm the director of home services and I'm talking to people who are essentially in my previous role. I mean, a lot of them are just like me. They come from a sales rep background, or they were somewhere in the company, and they're, the CEO's like, "Oh yeah, go buy some leads." And so we're not very sophisticated yet, and there is so many solar companies that are out there. So I'm excited to go out there and kind of, teach some of the learnings and try to educate in the space and really, hopefully, empower a lot of the buyers as well as sellers that we work with on the relationships, the partnership, and it shouldn't be buyer here, seller here.
Yeah. So, just another little maybe tip you can give on the reporting. The guys that have that reporting, is that something that they've built out internally, or is that a system that they're using, like a lead management system or a lead conduit for all?
Yeah, so a lot of companies are using good old Excel, download to CSV, pivot table style. I do see some companies using their CRM or Salesforce reporting. The companies who have adopted our technology are starting to use our reporting feature, which came out mid last year.
So does it have that capability and in the some of the stuff that you alluded to in Lead Conduit, or?
It does. It does. It gives you the ability to not only track your volume, your rejections, your ultimate deliveries, but when you set up the feedback feature, it's communicating not only to the CRM, but it's also pulling data back. And ultimately, when you have all the information in one hub, you can track CAC, you can track appointment rates. Really, you can track by any field that you choose, and you can do it in a way where you can kind of drag and drop and really visualize. And ultimately, that's the goal, is to visualize hourly, daily. I mean, when you're spending, there's some companies we work with today that spend over $1 million a month in solar lead gen. And every day, you figure you divide that by 30 days, 7 days a week, that's a lot of money. And if you divide that by how many hours in a day, somebody should be looking at that every hour, because that's a lot of money coming in and a lot of money that you're spending on call center floors. And, that's a big piece. And that's part of what we're doing, is trying to educate others that it's not just delivering leads. It's not just, trying to send them to your CRM. It's about all these great things that you can do with the valuable data that you're paying $35, $50, $100 for.
Yeah. Well, what is the average price these days for leads? Is around that 35, $40? Is that for a shared lead as well?
Yeah, so good question. In some of the major states, New Jersey, California, Arizona, you are seeing the range of anywhere between $40 to $60 for a non-exclusive lead, all the way up to 80 to 100, if not more, for an exclusive lead. When you get into appointments and transfers, you're at the 150, 250 mark.
Wow.
For exclusive. In some of the smaller states that are really growing, you're seeing a cost per lead somewhere between $25 to $35 for non-exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And, to kind of build on that, the CACs, right? The cost to acquire, in California, if you're doing $2,000, you're really good. Like, you're doing great. I'm coming across states like in Texas and others where they have sub $1,000 CACs, and they're doing, 30, 40, 50 deals. And, so
And
to answer your question, it
obviously they're
varies.
getting less revenue from those deals as well, though, right? Or no?
It depends. I mean, obviously, when you look at the states, labor costs are different,
Yeah.
material costs are different across different regions. So it's really dependent upon the different states and the regions. But your media costs could be lower, and in turn, yes, sometimes the systems are smaller, but there's also a lot less competition in some of these newer states. So you have some really, big companies, great companies coming into the space, like Power Home Roofing and Solar, Momentum Solar, SunPro Solar. These are all companies who are growing, who are going into states and have figured out that they can do business in these communities and states where solar is not as competitive. Therefore, they're able to scale and grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the solar coaster. Where are we at on this ride right now? And maybe just for myself, give me a little bit of a background from like 2000, 12 or 13, when you or 10 when you got into it, and where it went and where it is now and where we're headed.
Yeah. So I'm a self-proclaimed solar junkie. I really love the technology. I just like the essence of freedom, right? The freedom of
Yeah.
choice. I think as Americans, we have so many options when it comes to so many different things that we do in life that energy should just be the same. In California, obviously, we have an investor-owned utility framework, which a lot of people all over the country have heard about over the last year with the fires and PG&E and all the things that have gone unfortunately wrong. But the state of solar today in America is great. People are making money. Companies are growing. People are being employed, not just in the core states, but in many new states. Legislation has become bipartisan, and people on both sides are seeing that solar is good business and it's good for communities. The In 2010, 2012, you had a few very large companies like a Real Good Solar, like a Sunrun, like a Solar City, Varangos. There was a few others, on the East Coast as well. But you didn't have a lot of, smaller regional players that you do today. At the time, there wasn't a lot of financing options. Wall Street hadn't gone all in the way they have today. There also wasn't a lot of technology, and even the installing capability and the products that are out there today. Just the entire product chain and install process has just leaped and bound over the last 10 years. And ultimately, across America, states are growing. I'm talking to companies who they're selling 20, 30, 40 installs a month, that's a lot. Even if you're doing a 15K or 12K system, I think there's also an evolution where companies are realizing they need to pair other trades such as roofing or smart home or insulation along with their solar project. But in general, the industry has matured. Financing options are prevalent. You have, credit unions are giving out loans nowadays for solar, and you have some massive finance companies such as Sonova, such as Sunrun, such as Sunlight Financial, that Mosaic, who are providing financing at lower credit scores than they were previous. And then you also have finance companies who are coming in and focusing on much lower credit scores, for better or for worse, and ultimately offering solar power to people of all income and all credit classes.
Now, but there was a sort of a heyday, though, wasn't there? And some of these companies sort of disappeared, right? Or
Yeah, I don't. The
no?
heyday, I wouldn't call it necessarily a heyday. I think
Okay.
there was a lot of companies who were growing really quickly, like a
Yeah.
Solar City, like a Barango, who we're just trying to scale at all costs. And I think the model of having a construction company that's nationwide is still to be proven. I mean, the ones that stick out to me are like ADT, maybe
Yeah.
Empire Today, Terminex. I mean, these are home service companies that are nationwide, but there's not like a lot, right? It's really hard to do to have a home service companies that covers the entire US. So I think there was a lot of failure that companies today have learned from. And ultimately, instead of having a few big players, now you have a kaleidoscope of smaller regional players. And a lot of the business owners come from Solar City backgrounds, come from Sun Edison backgrounds, and have gone or been in leadership or executive roles or management roles and go, you know what? I can start a solar company in my town. I could do this in my region. And distributors and finance companies have gone from just working with the big players to being able to have partner programs that can work with the smaller regionals. And I think that's really the future of solar is you're going to have the big players, but
Yeah.
the regional players are here to stay. And the rise of sales organizations who only do sales and marketing but don't do the installation and partner with what's called an EPC contractor. These two entities have now evolved, and one saying, "Hey, I'm really good at sales and marketing, but I don't want to do installs. I'm not good at that." And one company's like, "I do really good at installs and customer service, and I'm going to partner together and collectively we're going to work together and blanket it with a top finance company." And that's kind of how the process has evolved over the years.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I sort of misspoke. I was, thinking of, these big companies that were growing, 8 years ago and really probably just grinding through it
Mm.
more than anything than a heyday. But they grew on the backs of probably equity and all that sort of stuff. But now, so you're saying you see the regional smaller players sort of being sort of the future, at least for now, and then maybe down the road there's some consolidation of some sort, but it's more
Um,
regional.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like in San Diego, you have companies like Baker Electric and Semper Solaris that are huge. I mentioned Power Home, Roofing and Solar in the New England states, SunPro Solar, very huge regional, now nationwide, company coming out of New Orleans, Louisiana. Momentum Solar out of New Jersey has expanded all the way to the California coast. So you have these big companies that are doing thousands of deals a month, but you also have a lot of small regional guys who are doing anywhere from 10 to 30 deals, and they're profitable, they're giving good service. The end buyer is saving money. And I see that as being kind of the future of solar and how it's growing and how it eventually will get to a tipping point where you won't necessarily even have outside sales reps. It'll just be kind of over the phone, very mortgage-esque, like, hey, why don't you lock in my energy rate? Let's get some solar on our home.
Yeah. Now, like I said earlier, at the time I was working, there's maybe like really a handful of states that were viable to work in. What's it like now?
It's business is good.
Yeah.
North Carolina's, and I mentioned Louisiana, Texas, which 10 years ago didn't necessarily even have a solar market. Texas is huge. There's some great companies in Texas. Off the top, Wells Solar, Freedom Solar, which is a sun a power dealer. These are companies who they're doing business and they're
Yeah.
servicing their communities. There's a
But
lot of
are the states that like before it was a matter of states having either buyback or incentives um, for it to make sense for the
Yep.
consumer. Is that sort of still the case, or now are those incentives still in place, and are they sort of required for it to make sense for these consumers?
Yeah, so there's certainly SRECs available on the East Coast still today. I'm not as privy to the incentives.
Yeah,
I know the incentives in California were gone like 10 years ago,
they
but
were okay. Yeah,
what I would say is that the cost of the material and panels, the cost of labor, and just the overall process, along with the offering of financing, has made solar energy very competitive in most states with the current electric and gas prices that are serviced by those utilities. Obviously, deregulation is happening and has happened across many states. So people are having the option, whether it's installing solar on their home through putting panels on their roof, or whether choosing to have clean energy solutions on their bill through a solar, community solar, or solar farm, or some type of option. But more and more states and utilities across the U.S. are giving consumers an option to choose clean energy. And believe it or not, there are some homeowners who choose to pay a little bit more for energy because they feel good about what they're doing and using the clean energy option on their bills. So I think
Yeah.
things are definitely changing and going the right way.
Okay, so let's tie it back into lead gen for a minute here. One of the biggest questions that I always get is like, well, okay, well, what industries, what verticals are still growing and have good opportunity for me to go out and get involved in? Would you say that? I mean, based on what you said, I would think the answer is yes. But would you
Yeah.
think? But then again, it could be highly saturated with a ton of lead gen companies in there. It may not make sense, but would you say that there's an opportunity for companies to continue to explore solar as a lead gen vertical from the marketing perspective?
Oh, huge, huge
Yeah.
opportunity. I think to your point earlier when we started, a lot of companies and a lot of lead gen providers that I come across and they go, yeah, I was in solar like in 2014, 2015. Solar City was buying all my leads and then
Yeah.
they stopped and all this stuff. So I've heard that story from so many different vendors in the space. And ultimately they either lost money, got a bad taste and kind of walked away. But things are different now. There's far more zips, far more coverage, far more smaller players that are buyers, and ultimately, I think it's a great opportunity for lead gen companies and sellers and affiliates to get into the space and to create solar offers. There's a lot more eyeballs out there who are interested and more knowledgeable, and not just knowledgeable about how because back in the day, you were trying to educate people on how solar works, like the power from the sun. And now, like, people are already like, oh yeah, that's how you do it. Now people are more like, what are my options? People have heard the word PPA or know that there's a solar loan out there. So people know that they don't necessarily have to pay cash. So I think there's far more creative and ad creative that you can use on the front end that ultimately will lead to better quality leads. So to answer your question, I think it's a fantastic time to get in. And most big lead gen companies that we work with and that I see out there have got into solar or trying to get back into solar.
So from a buy side, the lead buyer side of people that have been listening, can you guys help? Obviously, you have lead conduit and trusted form, which is very helpful because you could simply ask a lead seller if they're using trusted form, and that would probably be a good stamp of approval if they are. But if someone's interested in not only learning about lead conduit but also learning about finding good sources, is that something you guys can sort of help point them in the right direction? Obviously, you're not, you know, you're not necessarily putting a stamp of approval on every single lead gen, but is that something you can help with?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the big. That's one of our big selling points. Is like, hey, we're not just a technology. We're a partner. We're here to do introductions with new sellers that come our way. We're able to do introductions to new buyers for sellers, and ultimately, we want to be the a consultant, a coach that's always there and helping you, introducing you to other technologies, whether you need a dialing solution, whether you want to try some type of new enhancement or filtering process, or if you just have a problem that lead conduit doesn't fix today, or you have an internal process that is manual that you're looking to automate, bring it to us. I used to always think of Active Prospect as like an in-house think tank. I'd have a problem that I couldn't solve internally, so I just call Active Prospect up and be like, "Hey, this is the issue. Like, could you help me? Could we build this?" And we as a company build what our customers want. Obviously, we focus on our core products, but the iterations within the products really come from the demand of the consumers and from our clients. But yeah, I actually have a list of about 80 different buyers. So if you're a lead vendor and you sell solar or home services, I personally have a list of about 70, 80 different lead buyers that either work directly for the solar companies or work for a finance firm. And essentially, every time that you have an offer, every time I get a new offer that, once again, is TCPA compliant or trusted form certified, I'm able to send that offer out. And usually it's like a blurb of what you're doing. It has your landing page link. It has, your options, essentially your offer. And then I just forward that on. And I probably do that once every 2 weeks for certified lead vendors who come on our platform. And then ultimately, for new buyers, part of my process in selling and building equity with buyers and solar installers and home service companies is go, hey, why don't we start off with me introducing you to some quality players who are TCPA compliant, and let me do a few introductions, and ultimately those introductions lead to volume, and then they come back and go, hey, it worked out, and tell me more. And then ultimately the vendors that I introduce them to obviously have good things to say about our product and about our services.
Yeah, no, it's great, and you have experience from the buy side too. So there's clearly it from both sides of the table here,
Yeah.
and truly are trying to help. How does someone get a hold of you? What's the best way if they want to reach out?
Yeah, you can email me at ruben@activeprospect.com. You can also reach our company at www.activeprospect.com. We're based out of Austin, Texas. I myself am located in Southern California, but I'm visiting, companies nationwide, call centers nationwide. Give me a ring. I'm
Yeah.
always here to help. I'm always here to answer questions, and I enjoy talking lead gen for home service providers. It's really a passion of mine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on and re-educating me on what's happening in solar too. Probably talked a lot of things that you weren't expecting to talk about, but I appreciate you
No,
answering
this
the
is
questions.
awesome. I
Yeah,
appreciate you having me. I'm honored. I think what you're doing in the lead gen space is fantastic, and we just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you.
absolutely. Well, thanks for being on the show. I'll make sure to get your information up here so anyone can reach out to you. And yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.